Hello, I'm Anne of Handmade, and this is me doing a quick video of the book that I made for the second publication of Textile Wanderings for the Love of Stitch. So thank you so much for buying the book. I hope you've really enjoyed having a look through and that you're going to join in some of the little projects. I thought it was going to be easier to actually do a little video of the finished book than try and photograph it in its entirety. So this is a bit of an added extra if you have bought the book. If you haven't bought the book and you really like the look of it, the projects are all in the book that's self-published and it's available via my website. So this is the actual finished book. You've got the really cute binding that I did at the edge. I saw something like this at Knit and Stitch in 2021, I think it was, and I couldn't quite work out how they'd done it, so I don't know if this is correct, but this was my version of doing little tabs and then stitching through from front to back with little beads in between just to space it out. I just think it gives it a really lovely little feel. It looks quite effective. So obviously you could do as many pages as you wanted to. You don't have to put it together as a book. It could be just individual little projects that you want to do, however you want to work it. So this was the front cover that I did. So on here I've just added some little bits of lace, some tatting that I'd got on some of my vintage buttons, and then onto a piece of bias binding I'd just done the title The Love of Stitch on there as well. And then the back cover was just a piece of vintage quilt that I'd got, and then I've just got my name just stitched on the back, just kept really simple. So the little projects that we did, so the very first one was just piecing together the fabrics, and this is a technique that I absolutely love. If I'm just wanting to sit and stitch, this is just something to do with lovely little bits of fabric, really simple straight stitch, or you can make it as complicated as you want. You'll notice as I go through the book I don't back any of the pieces at all. I really like this sort of subconscious stitching. It sort of tells a little bit of a story as to what was going on behind your piece, and I don't worry that it's not the neatest. I really quite like it. It becomes quite abstract, so sometimes you get marks that make sense, other times it's where your threads jumped around. So I just think it can look quite nice just as a little piece on its own. If you wanted to add things onto the back of it, totally up to you. This is what I mean. I love it. I just love how you get all these different bits, and then sometimes if you've wrapped fabrics around your piece, they come to play at the back as well. So the next one was the paper piecing. So with this one I just played around with different sized hexagons and going over the top with a straight stitch. I love that technique because I just think it blends it into the background. It's something that I did on the 52 tag challenge that I did, which is still available on my YouTube channel if you fancy joining in and doing a tag a week, or even a flag, which is the current project. This one was inspired by the Earth from the Air, and there were some textile pieces that I'd seen that looked like little allotments, which were absolutely beautiful. And I thought, oh, that really lends itself to lots and lots of different types of stitching. So we've got straight stitches, bullion, French knots, tiny chain stitches, satin stitch, little bits of fly stitch in there as well, connected flies and disconnected ones, little sheath stitches. So there's all sorts going on in that little piece. I just think it looks really effective as well, just choosing one shade of colour. Obviously it doesn't have to be in a grid shape. You could do a circular piece and section it off a little bit like a pie. It could be the whole thing that's gridded. So again, a little bit like all the projects that I do, I just set you off going with an idea. I did love this one. It took me a lot longer to stitch than I actually planned, but I just love the finish effect, love the textures that are going on with that one. I love the back as well, just crazy. And then home. Home is where the heart is. Little heart there on my piece. Obviously, if you've done any of my projects, you know I always have to put a heart in there somewhere. So this was just on a little bit of lace that I'd found, and I've stitched the word home. Just playing around again with different bits of fabric. I love the selvage edges on bits of fabric where you get the colour registrations on there as well. And again, quite simple stitches, chain, straight stitch, cross stitch on there as well. So quite a calm one compared to the previous one. So I do like to mix it up a little bit. Then we go a bit more bonkers as well. So this one you've got to be quite brave, because you laid all your fabrics down and tacked it all together, and then you cut it up and then redid it and restitched it down. So you end up with quite a lot of different shapes to play around with, and actually then once you've got all these different shapes, you can then play around with lots and lots of different stitching. When I actually came to put the book together with this, I realised I'd done it upside down because I wanted the bullion knots on the edge, and actually when I stitched it, it had been that way up. But I quite like it the other way up because I wanted the bullion, because the bullion goes round the edge. I really wanted that to be the edge of my page. So that's quite a nice technique to do, because you do have to be a little bit brave. I left my tacking stitches in, so the really big stitches that you can see were all the original tacking stitches that were on there, but I just think it becomes part of your piece. Then a little bit of calm. I do like playing around just with one colour, so with mine I just went totally neutrals with this one, but you could just choose your favourite colour if you wanted. And just playing around with repetitions of shapes, so you've got the little rectangles that are sort of repeated, using the edges of like napkins and tablecloths on there, different types of fabrics. So we've got some see-through fabrics, so bits of muslin, bits of fabric that had been rust dyed. This is great for using up little bits and pieces out of your stash. I tend to have a basket full of bits and pieces just to have a proper play around with, and also like repetition of things. So I've got the edge of, I think this was like a doily or a table mat, so I'd used it down the edge, and then I've got the border, and I've got a bit left over here. So I try and use up as much stuff as I can in my pieces. It's very rare that anything goes to waste, so just keeping that really neutral. Then this one was inspired by a holiday. We'd actually gone to Wales and we were at the slate mine, and when I looked down the valley you could see all these hills and valleys and just land lying over. And if you have a look in the book, there's some photographs from the slate mine that we went to. Popped a little bit of yellow in as a bit of a contrasting colour because it was a lovely sunny day, very cold, but I think I love it when you get these blue crisp days with some lovely sunshine, and it just makes you feel so much nicer. So this was just totally playing around with a satin stitch and really layering it up. I could have filled it all, so I could have filled all these areas as well, but I decided I quite liked these little gaps, little breathers in there. And then this one, adding text to your work. I have a bit of fabric that's just printed, looks like a typewriter's printed it, and I loved some of the words that were in there. And I've seen quite a bit of artwork where people use book pages and they highlight little areas of words and then colour the rest in. So I was playing around with this with stitch. This was one that I started off with my idea and got partway through and really didn't like it. So I put it on one side, went and did something else. And then when I came back, I thought, oh, it's because there's too much space around the edge. So I found a little bit of lace that had got this grid pattern and just started playing around with cutting. It was only a tiny bit I'd got left. Just cutting some of the shapes off and using it as little translucent layers through, and then started playing around with layering up some little squares and just taking the odd word out. And then stitching into it. Just keep stitching. And I think this is a natural sort of process to go through when you're working, is you do get to a stage where you just put things and you just think it's just not right, it's not working. And I never ever unstitch or unpick anything. I just put it to one side and just think, right, I've been looking at it way too much. Pin it up on the wall, put it to one side, come back to it a little bit later. Or if you do come back to it later and you still don't like it, I would tend to probably cut it up and then put it into another project. So I think just using words. If you don't have any printed fabric, you could obviously write onto your fabric. You could use letter stamps. There could be just a word that you'd like on there. But I think it's quite nice to have a play around with text. I think the thing that I loved about this was I was having to pick words out of the text. They weren't words that I chose, but I quite liked the words that were in there. And that was the last one. And then we get to the back of the book. You just see my little stitches there. And there we go. So these are just like a little set of mini quilts just put together as a piece. And really it's just to share, as the title says, for the love of stitch. It's quite nice to put things together in a project and to do something that's just for you. It's not for anybody else. And you can then just share your love of stitch with others. It's a great way of using up bits in your stash, but you don't have to spend a lot of money, like I say in the book. Just going like to your local charity shop. Some of these bits were bits of clothing, bits that I just picked up over time, and just really using what you've got, thinking about your colour combinations and just having a play, just giving yourself that little bit of time just to enjoy stitching. So once again, thank you ever so much for buying my book. If you want to have a go at these projects, like I said at the beginning, the book is available on the website, and I'll put a link in the little bit of the blurb. And you can also have a look on my website for my first book as well, which was called Textile Wanderings. This book was a little bit different to the second one. This was all about gathering ideas and doing little bits of stitch and using this more as like a sketchbook to record things in, whereas the second book is more about projects and coming up with actual stitch pieces. So they do quite nicely go together. If you've got the first book, you could use ideas and colours and images from that to inspire the second book. So happy stitching, everybody, and just remember, just keep stitching just for the love of stitch.